Functions Librarian at California State University, Los Angeles, and I'm here with my colleague, Kelsey Brown, who's a communications strategist and also works for the University Library. And we're working on a project highlighting healthcare professionals and their experiences during COVID-19 and how they express themselves with artwork. And we're here with MK Czerwiec. We're really happy to have you here. And we have a couple of questions for you. So we can first start by asking you if you can tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so my name is MK, and I am a nurse and a cartoonist and an educator. I work in the field of graphic medicine, which is the intersection of comics and healthcare.
And how did you get interested in working in the healthcare / the medical field?
I got into being a healthcare provider, a nurse, probably because my mom was a nurse. And when you're raised by a nurse, you end up sort of taking on a lot of those influences. And I originally wanted to have a place in the arts, but I was the kid who couldn't draw. And I thought that it wasn't possible. And so I was told that, this would be a better career. And I tried it my way. I got a bachelor's degree in English and philosophy. And then I was not finding employability. And so I said, well, you know what, let's go back to, I'll go back to school. I'll become a nurse and I'll be able to pursue the arts if I want to, but at least I know that I will have a good income and I know that I'm doing something meaningful with my life and I can help people.
Explain a little bit about what graphic medicine is. Like, what does that mean? And how did you even figure out that existed? Like, how did you get involved in that? I think that's a new term. I know I was like, wait, what? Is that a thing?
Graphic medicine, as I said, refers to kind of the intersection of the medium of comics and the experience of healthcare, the delivery of healthcare, the experience of our bodies and health and wellness and illness, disability, caregiving. It's a big kind of umbrella. But it started really when I was working. I was a nurse during the AIDS crisis in the 90s, through the 90s, not the 80s, the 90s. And the peak of kind of deaths from AIDS was right around when about a year after I started working as a nurse on a dedicated AIDS unit in Chicago. So I was a new nurse, was very young. This was completely overwhelming, and I didn't know how to cope. But since I had gotten a degree in the humanities, I thought there's got to be something in the humanities, whether it's writing or drawing or somehow engaging with the arts and the humanities that can help me cope with this. And I would write in journals, but then that felt like it was just all too much at once. And then I would make kind of drawings or paintings that then I felt that wasn't telling the whole story. So one day, literally out of desperation, to be able to go to work at 3:00 and do my shift and not still be upset about things that had happened the night before and losses we'd experienced, I just started drawing. I just drew this picture of myself. And I think I wrote over it like, I'm miserable. And I put a box around it. And then I put another box next to it. And I was like, oh, this is a comic. I guess I'm making a comic. And I didn't start with that intention. But much to my surprise, 9 panels later, it really did what I needed it to do. I found myself in a place of hope and with a whole new perspective on the situation. And like, I was ready to go to work and be present. And I felt like I found a place for my own grief. So that's how I literally stumbled into making comics. And then I went to grad school in medical humanities and bioethics, mostly because I wanted to inform my comics with theory about why stories help us heal, why our stories almost as therapeutic sometimes as any other intervention in helping people address what's going on with them. Why did they work for me as a provider? And so then during that time, there were a few people around the world who were looking at this possibility of the intersection of comics and healthcare could be powerful. And I certainly knew from my own experience, yes, yes, yes. And then we sort of started, and basically I ended up co-founding this field with a few individuals. One of them was the person who coined the term graphic medicine, Ian Williams. And his intention was basically that it was kind of a little bit of a joke, like the graphic itself could be the medicine. But now it refers to this whole field, which is international, is interdisciplinary. And we've just seen a tremendous amount of success over the last 10 years. And honestly, I never expected it, but it's been my full-time work ever since.
How did you begin to share your work with everyone else or find that there was a community that does this? I mean, it looks like you were, doing the artwork, but then how did you begin to share it with people and the public?
Two things. One was I had set up a website, comicnurse.com, which is to this day my website. And because friends and family and people I'd shared the art with said that, that like, I guess what I'm trying to say is I felt like I had found that maybe I could have a place in the arts and maybe this was it. So I decided to put it online. And so that's how other people found me and I found other people. And then the second thing was the guy who coined the term, Ian Williams, who's a doctor who makes comics. He, back in 2011 said, maybe we should have a conference. And that's how we all ended up meeting and coming together. And so I flew to London. I'd never traveled internationally alone. It was just out of grad school. I was really like, oh my God, am I really going to take this seriously and do this? It was a huge investment and leap of faith, but it paid off because I ended up hosting the second conference here in the United States. And we've had annual conferences since that have only grown in just enthusiasm and number and size and experiences and opportunities. And it's just been amazing.
Can you tell us about a challenging time you've experienced during the last year during the pandemic?
What was a challenge was we decided that we would curate the comics that were emerging about COVID. And we have a wonderful archive on the graphic medicine website of COVID comics. But initially that was really an overwhelming task. It was just an explosion of images and comics coming across our social media feeds and appearing in news outlets. I felt committed to wanting to archive them because I had done a graphic memoir about my work as a nurse during the AIDS crisis. And what I found when I went to the National Library of Medicine to research that was that most of the comics used during the AIDS crisis were actually lost to history. And so I felt very committed, like, we can archive these now. We should be the hub, right? But as I said, it was very overwhelming. And it became a real full-time job for a while. Then, it's tapered off for sure. But I think initially there was so much to learn, and comics are such an efficient medium for learning.
Thinking about your artwork, what does it represent to you? And what does it mean to you personally to create this type of artwork?
I probably could spend an hour talking about that. To me personally, the comics I make serve a couple of different purposes. One is a landing place for difficult experiences, right? So I make comics about what I'm going through to help me process and understand those things. Comics are an incredibly powerful medium. Comics are basically, image and text combined sequentially to tell a story. And when you think about that, applied to things that are difficult, things that are traumatic, it's incredibly powerful because it gives you the ability to, first of all, have agency over difficult experiences over which you maybe don't have agency. You decide how things are shown, what's not shown, you decide what happens. And you have to sort of make real in the world things that maybe are just stuck in your head, like your anxieties. You have to figure out how do I represent those? How do I make them almost sometimes amusing, right? Or how do I make them true to what I'm experiencing? And then in the end, it's no longer just here. It's actually on a piece of paper and I can potentially walk away from that, right? I've sort of organized it and I can walk away. It doesn't make it better. It doesn't make it go away, but it gives it a place. And so for me, that's really useful. And I've done a lot of work in that way through COVID of dealing with all of the anxieties and stressors. But the other piece of it is the comics that I choose to put out into the world as educational interventions or as memoir. I do comics for studies about how to make healthcare better. As a nurse, we see so many things go wrong that didn't maybe necessarily need to go wrong. They weren't necessarily wrong because there was poor communication or people didn't really know what they wanted or needed. And so I've worked with a lot of projects that are educational to get people to, for example, end of life planning. Let's use this as a medium to make having difficult conversations when we're well better, so that when we're not well, our loved ones know what we want and what we don't want, right? Or my memoir, which was really meant, it's called Taking Turns, Stories from HIV/AIDS Care Unit 371. And the goal with that was to bring forward some of what we learned during the AIDS crisis to try to think what's exportable, what can we use to try to make healthcare better, because this was a really exceptional place. And during the AIDS crisis, we provided really unique care because we had no cure, because, we could do nothing but be more present and with our patients and what could we bring forward. And then the other thing, I've done another book. I edited an anthology of comics called Menopause, a Comic Treatment. And one of the reasons I did that was because comics are actually great at dispelling stigma. And I wanted to just get people talking about menopause, which happens to half the world's population, but we don't talk about it. And it's a very disorienting experience. And everything I found about menopause in the medium I love, comics, was actually kind of insulting. We were the butt of jokes. And I wanted something that was empowering. And so through graphic medicine, I knew a ton of awesome cartoonists who had experience in this arena. And so I asked them to make comics. And so, yeah, so then at that point, to answer your question, comics are about dispelling stigma.
I do have a question because I'm an archivist, and you mentioned that you have an archive online. I'm wondering, what are the plans for that, and if how's it growing? How many have you collected so far? Yeah, I'm just curious about what's the goal for the archive.
Yeah. So yeah, I appreciate that you can appreciate why it was important to me to do this. Yeah, so the archive is actually being cataloged by the Library of Congress. They are cataloging our site, and so is an organization that catalogs libraries in the Ivy. There's some sort of Ivy League library consortium or something. They're cataloging the site as well, and so at least there's a sense it won't be lost, even if our site no longer exists. They're archiving the site, so we update it as new materials come in. It started with it's just one giant page. And then obviously we had to break it down into categories. So now it's actually organized by category, every category. So like educational comics versus coping comics versus, social justice issues that came up in comics during the COVID year. So, we've broken into comics by care providers, comics by people who had COVID. So we broke it down into those categories, and each of those has its own dedicated page. And then right now it's basically organized that it would be the oldest should be at the bottom and the newest should be at the top of the page. I don't know if that answers all your questions there.
No, it does. I'm just curious, but it's great to know that they're being cataloged, and they'll be, and so it could be a resource for people that are interested in learning more about it.
Yeah, and of course, the caveat is that we're not exhaustive. I know there's stuff out there that we haven't found yet, and every time, the more I talk to people and say, if you see a great comic, check if we have it. If we don't, please send it in. So we've tried to make it a crowdsourced endeavor. If you go to graphicmedicine.org, there's a contact, and 3 or 4 people get that email. So one of us, I'm usually myself, or I also work with a couple medical librarians who will help me archive this stuff.
Yeah, so it won't be lost. That's similar to the projects why we're doing this project too, is to do these interviews, and we're hoping that they would serve as, historically significant for people in the future. So if we continue to support the virtual exhibit, the platform that we're having, that hopefully these videos can, live on, that we're doing, or these interviews, and also share it through your artwork. So that's really great. I think I'm going to share your website with the healthcare librarian that we have here. So maybe she can share it with the students in her, that she shows the databases and things like that. What is your process to begin an art piece?
Usually it's ruminating on it for a while. I try to sketch a few, sometimes it'll just be an idea that comes to me. Sometimes it's a project that someone else wants, and I have to wrap my head around what's best for their, situation. So I usually ruminate it on a while, make some notes. And then it's, pencils, just start sketching with pencils. And then, I don't know how nerdy you want me to get. I could get as nerdy as in what kind of pencil, what kind of pen, what kind of paper. Yeah. Okay. So I can't draw straight lines. So I actually use graph paper. I use 1/4-inch grid graph paper. Most real cartoonists use what's called Bristol board, but I need the lines, I need the guides. So I generally, although I've been doing a little bit digitally, I think ultimately when I make a comic I'm serious about, it's going to be pen on paper. So, and then I use a really hard pencil so that it leaves a light mark. And then I draw, the text and the image, I'll, panel by panel, and then I ink it. And I find that, kind of having to draw something twice is really great, because in the inking, usually I think of a more efficient way to say what I was saying in the speech bubble or whatever, or maybe a more efficient way or a better way to angle it. So penciling is great because it gives you a chance to play, but then when you're inking, you kind of make it more sort of solidified. And then usually my process, I'll scan that into the computer and do a lot of the coloring in Photoshop. I really love watercolor comics, but I'm not there yet with my watercolor skills. But so I like to play around. Definitely the style I just described is what I did my whole graphic novel in, or graphic memoir, I should say, in. And it was all hand lettered and all hand drawn, and I really enjoyed that. Yeah, so that's pretty much the process. There are other variations, but for the most part, that's the process. I think the one thing I would say is that the important thing for the archive and for comics that we feature on our website is that they are accurate. So particularly if they're educational factual, one of the things being a nurse that's relevant is that I'm going to make sure that if we're presenting facts and intend to be educational, that it's right. But then, when they're memoir and they're bearing witness to your own experience, that's a different standard, right? I don't need you to be 1,000% factually accurate if you're sharing your experience, but I don't want you to be misleading. So there's an interesting hand there. But almost everything we come across, the cartoonists we work with have done that homework themselves and are doing really terrific work. I don't think we rejected a comic because it was spreading misinformation. The people spreading misinformation, either those comics don't come across my feed or they don't use comics. So we've been lucky in that regard.
Well, thank you so much, MK, for joining us. It was really a great interview. It was so different from our other ones that it was really so intriguing and so wonderful to hear from somebody who has such a varied experience in medicine and art put together.
Yeah, you do this for a living now, right? This is what you do. Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah, I mean, teaching and not really just making comics, but especially with teaching and lecturing, that's
great.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Bye.
Nice meeting you as well.
Bye.